They found the children kneeling in the dirt at dawn, bare feet, unblinking eyes. And when the men spoke English, the children answered. Imperfect, ancient French. Not Creole, not broken, not learned. Fluent, precise, as if remembered. This is not a story about language. It is a story about inheritance. Because none of those children had ever left the plantation. No ships, no tutors, no missionaries, no records. And yet, when asked where they learned to speak, they all gave the same answer. From the ones beneath the house. South Carolina, 1841. A forgotten stretch of marshland where maps disagreed with memory. Where church bells rang without churches. Where graves were dug, but never filled. What follows was buried deliberately. Court transcripts vanished. Parish logs were rewritten. And an entire plantation was erased from state records within a decade. Not because of what happened above ground, but because of what spoke from below. Tonight, we open the file that was never meant to be reopened. Not to sensationalize, not to accuse, but to listen, because whatever learned to speak there was still speaking long after everyone else went silent. It was called Bellavine, though no surviving deed confirms it. The name appears only once, in a faded shipping manifest marked void. Rice, indigo, salt pork, and human cargo listed without origin. Bellavine did not sit on high ground like most Carolina plantations. It sank into the marsh, surrounded by cypress knees and black water. The soil swallowed footsteps. Sound died quickly there. Neighbors later testified that Bellavine felt wrong even from a distance. Horses refused to cross its boundary. Birdsong stopped near the outer fence, and the air carried a smell like old paper left in a damp church. The enslaved families living there were unusually stable. No sales, no auctions. Children were born, raised, and buried on the same land. But something else was unusual. There were no overseers, no whips, no visible punishments. Visitors reported the enslaved workers moving in silence, eyes lowered, mouth sealed, as if speech itself was rationed. The owner, Etienne Laurent, claimed benevolence. A French émigré, devout, educated, grieving the collapse of his homeland. He told ministers that silence preserved obedience. That memory was dangerous. But ministers stopped visiting. One Methodist preacher wrote that the plantation listened back. Another claimed the slaves prayed without words, their lips moving in rhythms older than scripture. By 1839, children born on Bellavine no longer cried at birth. Midwives noted this with unease. They simply opened their eyes and waited. The discovery came by accident. A county surveyor, lost in fog, stumbled onto Bellavine's outer quarters. He called out in English. A child answered him, not with fear, not with confusion, but with grammar so perfect it embarrassed him. The French was old, formal, ecclesiastical, the kind taught in seminaries, not spoken in fields, complete with idioms extinct even in Europe. The surveyor assumed missionaries, or a secret school, but when questioned, the adults denied knowing French at all. They spoke English haltingly, poorly. Only the children spoke fluently, and they refused to translate. When pressed, one boy, no more than 8, said something unsettling. The words are not ours to give. Church authorities intervened. Priests arrived with Latin, expecting confusion. Instead, the children corrected their pronunciation. Records show one priest fainted. Another tore pages from his Bible and fled the property. That night, hymns were heard underground. Not sung, recited, layered, overlapping, as if many mouths shared one memory. Laurent sealed the main house. No one was allowed inside after sunset. But witnesses reported light beneath the floorboards. And voices counting. Always counting. In early 1841, Laurent vanished. No body. No will. No farewell. The plantation did not collapse. It continued, organized, precise, ritualized. Children began leading prayers. Adults followed. Then the ground gave way. A storm opened a sinkhole beneath the main house, exposing stone steps descending into darkness. Beneath Bellavine was not a cellar. It was a chapel, older than the plantation, older than the state. Walls etched with prayers in French no historian could date. Benches worn smooth by knees that had knelt too long. And beneath the altar, names, hundreds of them, not enslaved names. European, clerical, monastic, men who never appeared in American records. The children were brought down. They did not react with fear. They began to speak, and the words they spoke were not learned. They were remembered. The men who entered the underground chapel did not record what they felt. They recorded what failed. Candles would not stay lit. Ink bled through parchment as if the paper were wet. Prayer lost its sequence. One clergyman wrote only this before resigning his post. There are confessions here without sinners. The chapel did not resemble American construction. The stone was European, cut, dressed, numbered, as if shipped piece by piece across the Atlantic long before Bellavine existed. No crosses stood upright. They were carved sideways, half buried into the walls, as if meant to be leaned against rather than worshipped. The altar bore no stains of blood. Instead, it was worn smooth by hands that had gripped it in desperation. The church attempted to claim jurisdiction. They failed. Every official sent to Bellavine reported disorientation, forgetting names, dates, even prayers they had spoken daily for decades. One bishop claimed the chapel corrected him, that when he recited scripture, the walls responded with an older phrasing, not blasphemous, just earlier, as if the Bible itself had not yet finished becoming what it would be. The children were removed for questioning. They did not resist. They followed, and as they left the property, every adult on the plantation knelt, not in protest, in relief. The children were separated, placed with families, sent to orphanages. Within weeks, the pattern emerged. They spoke French only in churches, only near stone, only when hymns were sung off-key. Doctors found nothing wrong, but caretakers reported the children waking at the same hour every night. 3:17 a.m. They would sit upright in bed, eyes open, mouths moving silently. When asked what they were saying, one girl answered, "Roll call." Another said, "Attendance." A boy in Charleston wrote an entire sermon in flawless 15th century French, then burned it before anyone could read it. When punished, he did not cry. He only asked, "Am I still counted?" Church officials quietly agreed to regroup the children, not to protect them, to contain them. They chose a Catholic orphanage already struggling with funding. Old stone, thick walls, a place accustomed to silence. Within days, the nuns reported something unsettling. The children did not play. They organized. They arranged beds like pews, spoke in turns, corrected adults gently, respectfully, but always with certainty. One nun wrote, "They do not ask questions. They issue clarifications." The children requested access to the basement chapel. They were denied. That night, every bell in the orphanage rang once. Not together, in sequence, from lowest to highest, as if someone were counting floors. By the third week, the youngest child, barely 6, began hearing confessions. Adults knelt. They did not remember doing so afterward. The orphanage closed within 2 months. Official reason, illness. No graves were ever recorded. In 1843, a sealed report reached the South Carolina General Assembly. It was never entered into record. A clerk later claimed the document felt heavier than paper. The report concluded that Bellavine was not a plantation in the traditional sense. It was a preservation site, a place built to keep something alive. Not bodies, but structure, hierarchy, voice. The enslaved families had not been taught French. They had been prepared, raised in silence so that when the voice returned, it would not be drowned out by noise. The report recommended complete erasure. Burn the house, flood the chapel, scatter the families, and most importantly, never allow the children to gather again. Bellavine burned without flames. Witnesses saw the house collapse inward, as if pulled from below. The marsh swallowed the foundation. The chapel entrance vanished. No bodies were found. No remains recovered. By morning, the land was flat, still, quiet. The state declared the area uninhabitable. Maps were redrawn. The name Bellavine was removed. But something remained. Travelers later reported hearing counting in the fog. In French, always stopping one number short. The children grew up. They became clerks, teachers, priests. None of them ever married. All of them requested burial near stone, near churches, near old foundations. And across South Carolina, from 1850 onward, something strange appeared in parish records. Corrections, notations and margins. Older versions of prayers resurfacing, as if someone were gently reminding the church of something it had tried to forget. And every correction ended the same way. A number, not total, not complete, waiting. By the turn of the 20th century, the voice no longer needed stone. It learned metal. South Carolina entered the age of telegraph lines and early radio towers like everywhere else. Unevenly, experimentally, without caution. Rural transmitters were erected by amateurs, church groups, and colleges. Wires ran across old land without permission from the dead beneath it. In 1907, a ham radio operator outside Beaufort reported something unusual. When tuning between frequencies, he heard French. Not broadcasts, not music. Recitation, measured, rhythmic, as if spoken from a pulpit no longer bound to a building. At first, he assumed interference from overseas ships. But the signal did not drift. It stayed. And when he shut down his equipment, neighbors reported hearing the same cadence through unplugged receivers. The words were not sermons. They were procedural. Names, dates, corrections, and then numbers, always ending one short. The operator stopped broadcasting a month later. His journal ends with a single sentence. It is not transmitting. It is checking. In 1912, a small seminary was established near the former Bellavine Marsh. Officially, it was meant to serve rural parishes. Unofficially, it attracted students who shared an unsettling trait. They corrected their professors. Not arrogantly. Precisely. They used older versions of doctrine. Referenced councils no longer taught. Quoted scripture in forms no modern Bible contained. When challenged, they did not defend themselves. They apologized, and then asked permission to continue. One professor later testified that lectures felt like rehearsals, as if the students already knew what he would say, and were waiting to see if he would say it correctly. The seminary's library began to change. Books returned to shelves altered, margins filled with annotations written in multiple hands. Yet in the same ink, the same script. Always French. Always calm. One librarian counted the corrections. They stopped at the same number. One short. World War I disrupted everything. Young men were sent overseas. Radios multiplied. Voices crossed oceans daily. And something reacted. In 1918, during a routine military transmission drill, a signal overrode all frequencies along the South Carolina coast for exactly 47 seconds. It was not static. It was not speech. It was a chant. Low. Unified. Spoken by many voices breathing as one. When the transmission ended, equipment malfunctioned across 3 counties. Operators reported the same phrase repeating before shutdown. Attendance incomplete. After the war, the seminary closed quietly. No scandal. No investigation. Its records were transferred to church archives. Then misplaced. The building was repurposed as a school. Children complained that classrooms felt crowded. Even when empty, those who encountered the voice did not form cults. They did not write manifestos. They did something far stranger. They stayed silent. Doctors in the 1920s noticed a pattern among patients from the coastal counties. A shared dream. Standing in a long room. Stone walls. No windows. A voice reading names. Each dreamer waking just before their own. The patients were not hysterical. They were calm. Resigned. As if relieved to have not yet been called. Families passed down rules without explanation. Do not build basements. Do not sing hymns too slowly. Do not count aloud in church. And above all, do not correct the prayer. In 1939, a university archivist discovered a phonograph cylinder mislabeled as French liturgical music. It was not music. It was a roll call. The voices were layered. Men, women, children, all speaking in perfect unison. The archivist noted that the recording caused nausea and disorientation when played. But he also noted something else. The voices paused, as if listening, then continued, correcting themselves. The final line of the transcription reads, "Still missing. The cylinder was removed from the archive. No destruction order exists. It simply vanished." In 1946, a fire swept through a regional church archive in Columbia. Official cause, faulty wiring. Unofficially, firefighters reported something impossible. The oldest documents burned last. Newer papers, thin, recent, dry, turned to ash first. But vellum held. Ink endured, as if age itself was a form of insulation. When the smoke cleared, one cabinet remained untouched. Inside were records that should not have existed. Transcriptions in French dated before South Carolina was settled. Maps that placed Bellavine decades earlier than any plantation should have stood. And a ledger, not of names removed, but of names pending. Each entry had a number. Each number stopped one short of a total that was never written. A note attached to the ledger read, "They are patient. We must be precise." The archivist who cataloged the material did not return to work. His wife later said he spent nights sitting upright in bed, whispering apologies in a language he had never studied. After the war, orphan trains and displaced families passed through the Carolinas. New children arrived, and something recognized them. Teachers in rural schools reported students who corrected hymns during morning assembly. Not loudly, not disruptively, but just enough to be noticed. When disciplined, they accepted punishment calmly. One child asked a teacher a question no 6-year-old should know to ask. "Is this the version you intend to keep?" Doctors noted no trauma, no delusion, just certainty. These children shared no ancestry, no shared upbringing. But when placed together, they fell into patterns immediately. Lines, rows, order, as if remembering where to stand. In 1951, a local radio station attempted a midnight broadcast of Gregorian chants for Easter. The transmission did not go as planned. Listeners across the region heard a pause mid-hymn, not silence, a breath. Then a single voice spoke, clear, measured, unmistakably French. Correction withdrawn. The chant resumed. Perfectly. Station logs show no interruption, no manual override. Engineers could not explain it. But listeners reported the same sensation afterward. Relief. As if something had decided to wait. Scholars today debate what Bellavine truly was. A lost monastery. A colonial experiment. A psychological contagion. But the pattern remains. The voice does not command. It does not threaten. It maintains. It counts. It preserves structure. It corrects drift. And it has never reached its final number, which suggests something crucial. It is still missing someone. Or something. And it will not stop listening until the count is complete. The final memorandum attached to the Bellavine records was written in 1953. It recommended permanent classification, not because the phenomenon was dangerous, but because it was functional, predictable, patient. The memorandum ends with a warning. If acknowledged, it will adjust. The file was sealed. The land remains undeveloped. And to this day, churches across the Lowcountry share an unspoken custom. They never end prayers on a round number. Always one short, just in case. In 1978, a junior archivist, new, unseasoned, obedient, was tasked with digitizing sealed church correspondence. The assignment was routine. The folder was not. It had no accession number, no authorization stamp, only a handwritten label in French. A completer. To be completed. Inside were documents that did not age the way paper should. Ink remained dark. Margins felt warm to the touch. The archivist noticed something else. The handwriting changed, subtly, across decades. Not styles. Not hands. Accuracy. Later documents corrected earlier ones. As if the file itself had been reviewing its own past. At the back of the folder was a blank page. Not empty. Waiting. In 1983, a public radio journalist recorded an interview with an elderly woman living near the old marsh. She had never left the county, never learned French. But when asked about Bellavine, she answered fluently. She described the plantation as a place that kept its promise. When asked what the promise was, she paused, then said that nothing important would be lost again. Mid-interview, she stopped speaking, listened, then corrected herself. Not again. Not yet. The tape ends abruptly. The station claims equipment failure. The journalist never aired the piece. He later told colleagues the silence on the tape felt intentional. By the late 20th century, the phenomenon no longer required churches, radios, or stone. It adapted. People began reporting the same compulsion in unrelated places. Editing documents late at night. Correcting wording they had not written. Adjusting numbers that felt wrong. Not out of fear. Out of responsibility. Teachers noticed students correcting textbooks. Programmers corrected code they did not understand. Clergy found themselves reverting to older phrasing during prayer. Always precise. Always calm. Always stopping one short. No one spoke about it. Because speaking about it felt unnecessary. Almost rude. It is not a demon. It does not possess. It does not punish. It does not promise salvation. It does not want belief. It wants continuity. It is not interested in individuals. Only structure. Only order. Only making sure the sequence is preserved. Whatever was built beneath Bellavine was not meant to rule. It was meant to remember correctly. And it learned, over time, that people were better carriers than stone. There is no evidence the count ever finished, but there is evidence it changed. In the most recent recovered document, a church memo dated 1999, the familiar numbering appears, and for the first time, the final line is different. Not a number, a word. Present, present. No total, no conclusion, just acknowledgement. As if something finally noticed where it was. This file was not leaked. It was not uncovered. It was released. Because forgetting is no longer a threat. Noises. The voice does not compete. It does not interrupt. It waits for silence. For precision. For moments when someone notices a detail is wrong and fixes it without knowing why. That impulse you feel to correct a sentence. To adjust a number. To repeat something until it feels exact. That is not fear. That is inheritance. The final page in the Bellavine file is no longer blank. It contains a single line, written in modern ink. Count continues. No signature. No date. But beneath it, pressed so lightly it almost isn't there, are fingerprints. Many. Overlapping. As if multiple hands rested on the page at once. Bellavine does not exist on maps. The chapel is gone. The plantation never officially stood. And yet, order persists. Corrections happen. And somewhere beneath language, beneath ritual, beneath memory itself, something is still counting. Not to end, but to ensure nothing essential is ever lost again. Because the most terrifying truth is not that something ancient survived. It's that it learned how to adapt. And it found us.